What is going on, everyone? You are tuned into the Invested in Hockey podcast. My name's Anthony Santini. The date is August 1st. I'm joined with,
Eric Wilson.
and today we are on our 31st edition of the Invested in Hockey podcast. Been a pretty good run. We're tuned in right now in free agency. It's been a pretty good time, chill time. We haven't really been too locked on regarding hockey and, talking about it, talking about sports cards, talking about the NHL. But we've seen in the recent past couple days that there have been NHL signings and exclusively defensemen have really been getting the bag this offseason. Something that we noticed, something we saw on free agency day. And even though it's been almost a month, actually, I guess a month since the
Yeah.
day of free agency, since free agency opened up, Guhle and Brock Faber, both big defensemen, young defensemen, getting paid. What do we think about that?
I mean, it's crazy how both these defensemen are from the 2020 draft. Actually, sorry, Goulie's 2021, but both we're seeing a lot of signings from players this age. And I mean, when you see a lot of money and you see defensemen that are playing in top two, top four, on teams that you watch or you see a bit, it's always interesting. And they weren't the only two signings, but the rest are pretty minor. And I think it's important to focus on how many years these guys are signed and kind of the approach that not only the teams took but the GMs. I should mention Bill Guerin before I forget. I don't know if you saw, but I was really impressed with the way he spoke about Brock Faber and the reason they actually did offer him that contract.
Yeah, obviously, when I was talking about Brock Faber 3 months ago, we were kind of thinking the contract could be a lot lower. I know myself, I was saying around that $5 million mark, maybe a 5, 6 year deal. I didn't really expect the Wild to lock him up at a big number and for, the max they could sign him to. But it makes the most sense, right? He's from Minnesota, his family's there, he likes it there, he played university hockey there, and he's a big defenseman for them with the trending up side of their youth that have really been prospering the past year. So for me, I'm pretty happy for Faber to get the money. I do personally think that it was a little bit of an overpay based on what I think he can actually get, what the Wild will actually get out of this contract down the road. I know you're going to get into that. But for me, it's a great contract for him. He's signing it long term, where he's from, a decent, AAV. He could hold out a couple more years, sign a bridge deal, something like that. That could really, lock him in at the peak of his career. But obviously, you're risking injury if you do that. So for me, this is a big W for Brock Faber, but I'm not going to call it a W for the Minnesota Wild just yet until at least 2, 3 years down the road at minimum to really start assessing how well this deal is for them.
Yeah, it's crazy because like again, you look at all these guys from the 2020 draft, and my approach when I saw this signing, I was very critical. I always like to worry about how teams are actually investing in their players long term, and I looked right at the 2020 draft and I said, okay, this guy's getting paid more than Laffy, Byfield, Stutzel, Sanderson, and I mean Gooley. I didn't say that because he wasn't signed yet, but I pretty much said he's the highest paid guy in the 2020 draft, and I was a little angry at it, ready to make a video on it, but I'm really glad I set the tone and waited a bit before we talked about it. I mean, going towards the Gooley deal, do you like the Gooley deal better? Or?
I wouldn't say that I like the Guhle deal better. I mean, almost I don't like it at all, quite frankly. I mean, although Goule's been a pretty decent defenseman for Montreal, I don't feel like this is the move that they needed to do right now. They have a lot of young defensemen coming up. We see Lane Hudson. I believe there's the Rhinebacker coming up as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, you might not be a fan, but also locking up Jack guys. So for me, I don't think this was the right move to sign Guhle for that long of a deal. Obviously, for the player, it's a great deal, just like Faber. If you're getting that contract put in front of you, you are signing it. But to run that power play, which is kind of what they're going to expect out of Guhle for the next 2 years, really, I don't see who else is really going to run that. I don't think that is the right move for them, considering they're maybe 1, 2, even less years away from the playoffs.
It's weird. It's a weird situation in Montreal because they're like one of the few teams that don't have a true number one defenseman. And I can kind of agree with you with the number one power play thing, but I don't think it's in their best interest to do that. I think that they want to have them on their top pairing at even strength and especially have them on their PK. But I think that, yeah, either have Matheson or Hudson, two quicker defensemen running the top power play. And then if you have Goulet on the second pairing and you throw another young guy out like Kirby Doc or like they had another winger too in the offseason. I don't know if you remember who they added. It was another young guy, like even if it's a Demidov kind of guy, like on the second unit. I think Guhle could make that second unit look good. I think that's maybe where the money's going towards. It's hard to know, right?
The winger, so who were you speaking about?
It must have just
Joel Ar
been no, it must have been Demidov. I don't think they did sign like a top six winger. It must be him who's gonna like sink into their top six, you know?
Eventually, down the road, I think that's what the goal is for him. He has that top three potential on
Yeah.
that forward group, but I do believe it's a little bit clogged up right now. Montreal's a bright future, so for them, they have that opportunity
Yeah.
to take the risk with Guhle, excuse me. Minnesota, on the other side, I don't think that they're in a position where their prospects are, still developing. I think they're almost going to be in a win now mode in 2, 3 years down the road. Like Kaprizov is really starting to get a little bit older. I believe he's 27, 28 now. Obviously,
Yeah.
missed a couple years because he was playing Russia. So you're missing almost 4 or 5 years of what he could have produced for your team if he was a rookie signing at 19, 20 years old. But for Minnesota to say, let's sign Faber, give him a good deal, 8 years, eight by, I believe, 8.5. Me as a fan, I'm relatively happy with it, but I do think that it stayed true to that trend of defensemen getting a little bit overpaid.
Yeah, and this could mean a lot for future signings in terms of how much defensemen get paid compared to forwards, right? We're seeing a trend where we all know that goalies don't get paid as much as players. I think the highest goalie makes like 8.5, if I'm not wrong. Like I think you know what I'm trying to say here. Like in terms of contracts, we saw.
Nice
Um,
goalie.
well, yeah, like there's not many goalies that make. There's no
Well,
goalie that makes.
Bobrovsky.
How much does he make?
Bobrovsky makes like 11 million, doesn't he? Or like 10 million?
Honestly, maybe to be honest, I'm seeing with like the younger goalies though, like Shesterkin, Sorokin, none of those guys are making like upwards of like eight. You know what I mean? And so if
Yeah.
we're seeing players like Faber get 8.5, are we gonna start seeing defensemen hit that $10 million mark, right? Because we look at like a guy
Yeah.
like Makar, he's making 9 million a year right now. I think Hughes is at 9.5 maybe or 8.5, one of the two, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's interesting. I think forwards at the end of the day are the go-to because they score the majority of goals, they make the majority of the offensive plays, right? But at the end of the day, it's a team game. So it's a really good talk. I'm glad I got your kind of insights on those contracts since it's been a big focus this week.
Yeah, big focus. I'm actively looking right now to see what Bobrovsky gets paid, just so we are sure. Maybe it's a little lower. So Bobrovsky's currently on a 7 year, $10 million deal. So he's making 10 with Carey Price being the highest paid
Oh,
goaltender.
wow.
Signed this contract in 2018, 8 years, $10.5 million. And I don't know how many years he really played of that deal. Was it like two? When were they in the finals? Like 2020?
Yeah, it must have been. Yeah, yeah, the year they beat the Leafs, right? Well, no,
Yeah.
he wasn't. Was he? Oh, he was playing. Sorry, I'm tweaking. Yeah, so it was like a 3 year. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
definitely tough. I mean, I'm glad that we're approaching the final 4 years of it now, or whatever it would be, right?
Yeah, it's definitely been a easy conversation after a couple years, obviously. When you speculate on a contract at the start of a player signing, it's easy for everyone to have an opinion, but after 4 or 5 years down the road of that contract, it really starts to stay true of what the player is all about. And we're kind of seeing that right now, shifting gears to Patrick Laine and what he's been able to bring to his contract. I believe he's on an 8 by 8 or making eight years. Sorry, he is signed to an 8 year, 8.75. Um, which is a little bit of an overpay. But considering the trajectory that he was capable of, and obviously still even the the offensive firepower that he could bring to a team, what do you think about Patrick Laine? Because I know you were really big on him last year's offseason, and you actually had him winning the Rocket as one of your hot takes of the summer, maybe a little bit of a value play. Not your, obviously Matthews was always the pick or Pasta. But what do you think about Patrick Laine and what he can bring to a new team this
Yeah.
upcoming season?
So overall, I think everyone can see the weakness in Liney's game is his full two-way presence. and full lineup presence, because there are nights where he's going to be invisible and he's not going to get ice time because of that. So it's not going to be like, oh, he's invisible for 3 periods. He's going to be invisible for maybe half the game and then not play the rest, because that's just the player he is. And on the positive side, he has a top 10, 15 shot in the league. And he's shown that he can score 40, because I think he did in his rookie year. He might have scored 39. Um,
Yeah.
but that's where the upside comes, and I think everyone wants a goal scorer. We are going to move into something exciting soon, where there are a lot of prospects who could be 40 goal scorers in the future. But to stick to Laine, I think that he just needs to find the team that fit. I don't know. He fits in, and like I don't know if that's going to be surrounded by like superstars, all stars, because he's been there. But I'm seeing some weird headlines surrounding like a team like the Jets, even where it's like a reunion with the Jets, and it's really interesting because I don't know where he'll go, to be honest.
I mean, with the loss of Tyler Toffoli, it could open up something for their team. We're seeing even Cole Perfetti that's kind of battling and treading water right now, looking
Yeah.
for a spot in that lineup. A very talented young player that could still, be one of the top six forwards on almost any NHL team if he really hit his true potential. Right now, we haven't really seen that, but down the road, it could be the potential that he has. For me, I'm not too optimistic on Laine. Obviously, I do like him as a player, but I don't think with that contract there's going to be much value for a team to
Mhm.
trade for him. Obviously, because you would have to give up a pretty penny to acquire Patrick Laine, even though he is on the trade block. I wouldn't think that Columbus is just looking to give him away. So
Yeah, I think in terms of realism, I think we're on the same page there. Heading into this 2024-25 season, no matter where he plays, I think that saying he's going to score 15 goals and get 30 assists is pretty on par. I don't think we can say, okay, he's a 25 goal scorer just because he's Patrick Laine. I think we should stick to like
Mhm.
a 45 point kind of guy, which to name players, that's something that Byfield had last year. So
Yeah,
just to kind of give a bit of a young comparison, I know Laine is not that young anymore, but you know what I mean? I think I'd like to see him play hockey. That's really the number one thing, and I'm glad he's out of the players program and kind of ready to go. Let's say for training camp soon. So
yeah. Yeah, a lot of young players in the league looking to make a spark this upcoming season. I know you wanted to finish up the pod. We got about 18 minutes left, I believe. So we're gonna fly through some of your top 31, I believe the list is,
yeah.
prospects. Is it coming into this NHL season or just in a whole?
So this is like a very, very whole list. It's not has nothing to do with NHL readiness. It has nothing to do with um contracts. It has nothing to do with like how these players have maybe performed at the junior level, and it has everything to do with their careers going forward, and maybe just like how they are as a player. So you might see a guy who plays 10 years in the league and has some success. Maybe he wins 2 cups, but that doesn't mean he triumphs over a guy who plays 20 years and is a consistent first liner and doesn't have a cup, right? So I'm looking at players and their actual skill level, and how they'll pan out based on maybe their potential, because they all are elite prospects. I'll be honest, and
Yeah,
like it's fair to say there's at least 50 elite prospects out there. Call it two per teams. We're already at 64, right? So it's going to be a good list here. I'm hoping there's some controversy. We're going to be releasing one per day in August. Today is August 1st, so it's going to be a good road for that. So I'm ready to get started at 31 here, but I will go over some honorable mentions, and I'd love to hear your quick thoughts on it, Sans.
let's go.
So, as honorable mentions, started off here, we have Brennan Othman, Sebastian Kosa, Matt Savoie, Matthew Poitras, Anton Silyev, Quentin Musty, and Callum Ritchie.
So these are people that did not make the list?
They did not make my top 31 prospects. So
What?
these players are not on my top 31 list. And
Okay.
I just again, like, it's really weird putting some of them on the list, but then when you hear this list, I think you're going to be pretty impressed with how many prospects are still considered prospects, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean. So, without further ado, I'll start with 31 here. Um, we're gonna have a nice post actually. It's gonna be a bit of a guess the player, so someone might be able to guess it, but it's Gabe Perreault. And we both know who Jacob Perreault is just because we've been really invested into him. He's a Habs prospect, but Gabe Perreault is a first rounder from the New York Rangers, and I have him at 31. Again, it won't be a huge in-depth explanation, but quite simply, as a Rangers prospect, it's going to be very, very difficult for Perreault to thrive. We both know Will Cooley, the 0-2, and I think that Will Cooley is going to have the firepower on the left wing over a guy like Perreault for years to come. And so you look at how stacked that roster is, and you look at who Perreault's played with, um, guys like Cutter Gauthier, Ryan Leonard. He's been around such good players that I think it's going to be difficult for him to be a superstar in the NHL, but I think he's going to be really good.
Yeah, it's a good take for Pro. I mean, we watched him in the World Juniors. Obviously, playing with that line gave him a little bit of early chemistry on in the tournament. But Pro's a good left shot forward, and I feel like he could be a serious NHLer in the league for many years to come.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. That will be a post out soon since it's already August 1st. Next up, I have Cole Eiserman at 30, who was drafted to the New York Islanders this year. He was honestly a projected second overall pick about a year ago, and he has an incredible shot. He loves to take slap shots, and he scores a lot of them, which is pretty cool. I think that he's going to have a ton of potential playing on the Islanders because there's no star wingers on that team unless you consider Barzal a star, but who might play the wing this year. So I think Eiserman could hop in the lineup in the next, call it, year and a half. And I think he could make some damage, and I think that could bring his value up and definitely be a good investment. So I have him at 30. Moving on to 29 here, I have Dmitry Simashev, a prospect for the Yotes who was taken in the top 15 in 2023. And you know what? There's just something that you can't ignore with a prospect who doesn't put up points but has like a really good skill set. I don't know who his player comp would be, but him as well as a former Guelph Storm prospect is kind of showing a lot of buzz for the Yotes. So I'll leave it at that
Yeah.
for Simashev. Next up at 28, I have former World Juniors MVP Jonathan Lekkerimäki. And I'm sure you
Oh,
remember this again. World Juniors is a big talk
yeah.
for us Saints, but this guy looked amazing. There's a reason he won MVP. Like, there's not much else to say. I might be having him too low on this list. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
It's low on this list. I can't really judge too much as of yet because we're only a couple players in. Once we get a little deeper in this list, that's where I could start to say, okay, you have this guy a little high, a little low. So for me, I feel like this is his good spot considering on the trajectory of what your rankings are, but good
Yeah.
little player.
Fair, fair. Okay. Well, next up, I have another prospect who has a brother. I know we've talked about a few now, but I have Connor Geeky, who is actually a Lightning prospect now. I could not ignore
Traded
this guy. I just could not. He's actually another top 15 pick. He was drafted by the Yotes, traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning, who have a very, very weak prospect pool. Especially seeing Stammer get traded. If Connor Geeky's in the lineup in a few years for Tampa, there's going to be a ton of opportunity. He doesn't just do one thing well. He kind of does everything. He's not the most physical guy and he's not the biggest, but he has a really good skill set. I think he's going to be better than his brother who's on the Bruins, but I think 27 might look bad in a few years. So we'll have to look back on that investment. But moving to 26, you've mentioned this guy a ton, but Zeev Boyum uh, was a freshman in the NCAA for University of Denver and was just drafted. Do you have anything to say about him, Sans?
So I actually finished up his interview the other day with the Spin Chicklets. Sick little story. Like I don't know if you were able to watch the episode. They had him on for about 40 minutes and it talked about him getting drafted and even just growing up. And it talked a lot about too how, his parents growing up didn't know too much about hockey. There was a funny little story about his dad watching their game online, watch the full game, and then realize that it wasn't actually the correct game that he was watching. And he said to, I believe it was the wife, or he called the son after and said, "Hey, great game, like nice hat trick." But turned out he was watching the wrong game and the same number as individual that wore the same number as him scored a hat trick. And his dad thought he scored a hat trick. So he kind of talked about, his upbringing and all that good stuff. So I'm a big fan of him
Wow.
so far. So I
Yeah.
like him on this list. Maybe I'd toss him a little higher though.
Oh, there you go. That's huge. A little shout out to the Spittin' podcast for at least giving us some info on this guy and his ability to definitely score hat tricks maybe in the future. So next up, another guy who actually played in the O this past year. We're at 25 here. Dalibor Dvorsky. Um, he's Russian. There's not a ton of Russians on this list, but I can't I can't really ignore the fact that this guy has lit it up in junior, and I just think that it will translate to the NHL. I think it's going to get to take some time, but he had a really good year for Kitchener. He topped a lot of good prospects on this list who, some of them didn't even make this list, but he produced. He seems consistent. I think he's going to have to improve, little things in his game, but I think 25 is a good spot for him. And then next up, a guy who's been in trade talks just like Perfetti, we have Rucker McGrody. So I think I put him a little high on this list, actually. I think there's some guys we've talked about who could be better, but McGrody's a big guy, captain of Michigan, captain the World Junior team who won in USA. So he knows how to win. And I think this can translate into the NHL. I don't know what you think there.
Yeah, Rutgers a good player. Obviously not going to be able to pan out on Winnipeg, it doesn't seem like, and he'll probably end up getting traded, which makes sense. I mean, based on where they're at and where he's at. I believe that it looks like he's looking to play in the NHL next season. But Winnipeg probably wants to keep him down playing for, I think their affiliate, is it the Winnipeg Ice? I believe
Uh,
their AHL
the
team.
Moose,
The
Manitoba.
Moose, Manitoba
But
Moose, or
yeah, the
Winnipeg
ice
Ice.
though, the ice are in the W. So yeah, I know exactly what
Right.
yeah. I'll move on to the next pick. Teammate of Edward Chalet, who I really wish I could have included in this list, but we have Yuri Kulich here, who was a stud in the World Juniors. Uh, he's so good, man. I think Buffalo needs a guy like that because
Yeah.
we both know how bad Buffalo is, and it's only time till this guy might play with Tage or something. So again, a brutal team, but a great prospect. I have him at 23. Moving on to 22 here, I'll try and speed up. We have Bennett Seneca. Um, I know it sounds crazy to have him at 22 because he was drafted third overall by the Ducks, if I'm not wrong, but
Yes,
a
he
guy
was.
who was projected around 7 or 8 in the draft. He played on Oshawa, and he did really well to be quite honest. Um, had a good year, does everything well, and he said something really interesting. I don't know if you got to see this, Sans, but he said, "I think my brain's ready for the NHL." He didn't mention his play, but he said, "My brain's so ready, like I'm so excited," and that's a pretty green flag if you ask me. So
Yeah.
I had to put him
Agreed.
at 22. Think he could be good, and I think there's opportunity there. Moving to 21, we have Zane Parekh, prospect for the Calgary Flames, who are in such a big rebuild mode, at least in the future. But I had to throw him in 21 just because he fell in the draft. That's my only concern, and I don't really know why. He broke some crazy records in the O, and I think this top 20 is just going to get even better. So at 20, I've got Lane Hudson of the Montreal Canadiens. So he played a game for Montreal, and it looks like he's just going to kind of smooth his way in without being a prospect for too long. But the way he skates and the way he reminds people of that, PP1 defenseman that Montreal's waiting for, I think he's going to thrive just based on the minutes and opportunity he gets. We're going to move on to my first goalie, which is at 19 here, Jesper Wallstead of the Minnesota Wild. The only thing I have to really say here, and I think you can agree here, Sanch, is that Philip Gustafson's there, and I think Philip Gustafson's good enough to be the starter when Fleury does retire after this season.
It's all dependent on how long Fleury stays for. I think he's only on one, there's only one more year
Yeah,
left on his deal, but for Philip Gustafson, who kind of struggled to keep his job last year against Fleury, who is kind of, on that down, do we want to call it that downhill of his
yeah,
career slowly, still relatively competitive in games. I mean, pretty confident starting him, but we'll see what he could bring and what the future of the Minnesota Wild crease looks like.
yeah. Next up at 18, I have Berkeley Catton, a guy who was drafted in the top five, I believe. Or no, he might have been, I think he went like seventh or something, but he was projected to go pretty high and he didn't. I think he's just as NHL ready as some of the guys I just talked about, like Senek and Parekh. But I think He's going to really have to prove himself, and if he does, it could turn out really well in terms of his point production and his the way he can really just improve others around him. So this leads me to another guy. This guy was drafted fourth overall, Kaiden Lindstrom from Medicine Hat. He's been pretty consistent. He had a small injury which limited his production in games played, so really small sample size, but it looks like he's just a workhorse out there, and he's going to be an NHL player for years to come. I'm going to move into my second goalie on this list, Dustin Wolf at 16. He just signed a deal. I don't know if you saw Sans.
2 years, 850, I think.
Yeah, absolutely no, like, not to say no risk, but super cheap for a guy who's going to start a lot of games. So I have him at 16 there. Lots to prove, but lots of opportunity. Next up, we got Owen Zellweger at 15. I think that his skating's great. I think he can shoot, but I think that he's going to really have to be bigger and better at the NHL level, especially for a team that struggles like Anaheim. Next up, we're getting into some serious elite players here. I've got Maverick Bork, who's a Dallas Stars prospect, a little overshadowed by guys like Stankoven and Wyatt Johnson, who are just elite already. But I think he's going to be great. He's had great AHL stats. Not much more there. This leads me to 13, Washington Capitals top prospect, Ryan Leonard.
Oh yeah,
Again,
good
another
pick.
World Junior champ, but he looks really good, and he jumped up on everyone's prospect ranking. Even on Craig Button's listing, I think he went from like 87 to like 5 on his ranking. So don't have him at
Oh,
5, but I got him at 13. So I think that's pretty solid. Moving on to 12, I have Artem Levshinov, who was drafted by Chicago second overall. Um, I just think it's tough for defensemen to pan out and be the guy and to have all that responsibility at the back end. Uh, I don't know where you would have him, Sans, but I know that's kind of where a lot of controversy would start, right?
well, because he's so young, and obviously he was ranked so high this year. Played out of Michigan State, and obviously defenseman. It feels like their value is slowly starting to increase. I don't mind this spot. It's kind of iffy just because he is so fresh of a player. We see year after year that the new player on the block, the new prospect on the block is highly touted. And then after, 2, 3, even 4 years, you kind of say, oh, yeah, like what ended up happening to that guy? Like, oh, he didn't really pan out. So I don't know if this will be that situation, but it does, bring up the conversation that our new prospects a little bit more, or sorry, highly ranked on a list similar like this. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I just again it made me think of guys like Reinbacher who aren't maybe at their top prospect peak as before. But anyways, this moves me to another defenseman at 11, Brant Clark of the LA Kings, who actually has started his
Okay.
NHL career. So he's a prospect. He hasn't played too much at all, actually. He's played under 35 games this past year with LA. So he'll clearly be in the lineup and stuff, but he spent most of his time with their AHL team. I think he played like 9 or 8 games for LA. So he'll be there. He'll be good. Not a sniper, but just a stud. And again, Dowdy's kind of still there, so I think that's really going to help his game just by having a model like that up front, right?
Yep.
Next up at number 10, a guy that not everyone knows about, Alexander Nikishin from the KHL. Um, Again, another guy who has broken records, supposed to just hop in the NHL after this upcoming season, maybe to play with Brent Burns before Burns retires. But a guy who's supposed to be elite, supposed to be able to do it all in the KHL, and he has. But I can't put him above 10 just because I don't know if that'll translate to North America. We'll move to 9 here, and again we're talking a lot Habs here, but I have Ivan Demidov. Um, Not a lot of highlights that we can see of this guy, but the way he was touted in the draft, he was supposedly a top 5 pick, top 3 pick, and so his speed, his shot, uh, can't really leave him out of the top 10. But again, while a couple of years in the KHL, who knows how this will turn out when people look back on this podcast, right?
Yep. No, for sure.
Anyways, going to 8, a guy I still believe in, and I want to hear if you still believe in him, but I have Shane right at 8.
What's your reasoning?
I think that Shane Wright's going to be a top line player. I think he's going to still be a top line player. I don't think he's going to be a franchise. tag guy or a generational talent, but I think he has everything and he just needs to keep building his confidence at the NHL level. I think he's going to be just as good as a Logan Cooley, a guy who's already in the NHL, or a guy like, uh, I don't, yeah, I actually am going to say this. I think he'll be um, similar to a Slavkovsky. I think that he'll
Hmm.
be a 70-point guy at some point. I'm not going to call him a 100-point guy at some point. I think Wright, though, will be a full-time NHLer, and it's just a time thing, and there will be opportunity in Seattle. So,
Yeah, it
um,
feels like it's just a matter of time that he starts to play and plays that full 82 healthy season. But it feels like Seattle's waiting on it. I don't know what it is, but definitely a
yeah.
lot of potential in Shane Ray. I wanted to hear what you had to say about it. We still got a list to fly through, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm definitely high on Shane Wright too.
Yeah, I think that'll be really good for our viewers to chime in just because everyone knows that story of him and how, you know, first overall in the OHL, how that is and pressure and everything. So anyways, that moves me into number 7. I have Logan Stankoven of the Stars system. And it's really hard not to want to put this guy higher, but his size is the only thing that's leaving him out of the top 5 for me. Pretty simple as that. I'm gonna go to 6 here, a guy who I didn't know where to put him, but I have Simon Edvinsson of the Detroit Red Wings, former 7th overall pick in 2021 or 2022, one of the years. And he looks NHL ready. People have said that he's going to be better than Mo Seider, which is
Hmm.
definitely something to think about. But I had to put him at 6, and I had him at 5, but I ended up moving up this next guy, who is Cutter Gauthier. So I got
Ooh.
Gauthier at 5. He's going to be playing top line minutes to start the year with Leo Carlson and Troy Terry. I mean, at that point, you just have to say, okay, he's going to be a full-time NHLer if he succeeds with those two guys, right? Um, I had to put Askarov at number 4 because I really believe in this guy. I think he's going to be better than Dustin Wolf and Jesper Wallstead. Um, moving into the top 3, this is where like it's tough. These 3 guys are all going to be in everyone's top 5, call it, but I have Will Smith at number 3. um, he's yet to play an NHL game, but he looked really good in college, just like a lot of these guys. Played with, again, really good line mates, but has that elite sense, everyone says. So I have him at 3.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to 2 right now. I have Macklin Celebrini, who, again, just drafted first overall. There's got to be a reason that there was no debate to take him first overall, right? Like,
Yeah.
absolutely no debate there. So I think there's a lot of hype there, but I think it's definitely tormented. And number 1, I got Matvey Michkov of the Philadelphia Flyers. So
Ooh.
I'll just say it right now. I think Michkov is going to be a star for his whole career, and I think he's going to be a 30-plus goal scorer from the get-go, his rookie year, and I think he's going to turn Philly around in terms of their next 10 years. So I think his footsteps and what they want from him is big, but I think he's going to be the best prospect, and that's why I have him at 1.
Yeah, we only got a little bit left. I mean, as a whole, I'll say you're pretty spot on with your list. I like it. There are some players, even to have Michkov as number 1. I like it because I feel like he has that opportunity to strive and take the reins. Even like it could be a hot take, but looking down the road, like that 15-year potential career for Michkov, take the reins, turn the Flyers franchise around, and really be that star player that they haven't had in a long time. The
Yeah.
only guy that I think you're missing is a goaltender
Oh yeah.
out of Detroit,
Casa. Yeah.
Sebastian Cossa.
Oh, it's hard, man. It's tough. I will say one thing. He had insane stats this past year. I looked a lot into him this last month, but the issue is that he's young and they don't want to throw him in the NHL yet. They have such bad goaltending, but they have goalies on contract and they signed another guy to like a year deal. They got Huso, they have a couple other guys, and I'm just worried that like if he doesn't jump in soon, it's going to be tougher to jump in
Yep.
a few years. I can
Yep.
agree that it's hard to leave him off this list. Anyone else maybe stand out to you at all?
Nothing, no one else too much. I thought it was a pretty spot on list, and I mean a good way to wrap out episode 31.
Awesome. We'll see you for our next episode regarding the Four Nations Face-Off tournament and some more info regarding that. But yeah, Sans, enjoy your long weekend, and we'll be back better than ever next week, probably next Thursday.
Yep. Cheers.